get to the next slide. You've got your handouts. So Old Testament survey so far. This is the first thing we're going to talk about. So we talked first about introductory matters. So the language of the Old Testament, Aramaic and Hebrew, mostly Hebrew. Unity, a bit of overview materials. Then we talked about the beginning. So that was several lessons, Genesis 1 through 11, creation, fall, flood, and nations. Those are the 4 topics there. And then the rest of Genesis is for the patriarchs, so 4 names, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So that's what we've been discussing. So now, brings us from, that discussion brings us from creation to fall to the first hints of redemption that we find in Genesis. All right, so the rest of the Old Testament and the rest of the Bible will take us on the path of redemption. It is a long story, but it is full of grace. So there's many beautiful things in the Bible. And each of these accounts of individuals and how God worked in their lives is a stepping stone in the pathway of redemption as we go from the fall all the way then until Jesus Christ. And He is the focus of it all, ultimately. All right, so we come to Moses now. So there's going to be a little bit of, well, I don't know how long, but maybe 2/3 of our lesson is the introductory material. So the date of the Exodus and ultimately of Moses. So we can determine this fairly accurately from the Bible. So the first thing to note is 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1. This is where Solomon is building the temple, and there are some key statements here that give us the date help us get the date of the Exodus. All right, so that came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So we're talking about now, Solomon is building the great temple in Jerusalem. This is where it is first recorded, and it gives us these time markers. So there is an overwhelming consensus on the date, the 4th year of Solomon's reign, 966 BC. It's not, now when we give these kinds of dates, and I'll probably mention this again as we go through, because there's other dates we're going to be talking about. Ancient records, their whole life, they weren't as meticulous in record keeping as we are. In our era, and even in our records, there's mistakes are still made, of course. But we have a much more of a consciousness of what year it is, what time, what day, and so forth. Any kind of government record keeping, if you work in a government office, you know all about that. But the ancients had, the historians and people who wrote, they didn't write the same way we would write. In fact, I just started a new book. I'm always reading something. This is on the history of the fall of Carthage, so the Punic Wars and all of this. And in the introduction, the author made the point that ancient historians wrote to entertain, not to tell you necessarily facts. So I thought, okay, that makes sense. And if you read Herodotus, for example, which is, for me, you may not find it interesting. I found it fascinating. There are many very entertaining things. He'll put in there, well, it is said that this happened. I don't quite see how this could be, but this is what is said. And he'll tell you some fantastic story. And maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, or maybe it's just made up. Anyway, so that we're saying that to preface the date. I said, basically, scholars agree the temple began 966 BC. Okay, so that's as hard a date, I think, as you're going to get in any for any ancient event, that one. All right, so then, this is a simple calculation. Add 480 years, okay, after the sons of Israel came out of Egypt, that gives you 1446 BC, okay? So we tend, conservative Bible teachers, okay, those who tend to give credence to what the Bible says, that it is the Word of God and that there aren't mistakes, we tend to then hold to this date, 1446 BC, for the Exodus. Okay? Now, there is a corroborating passage, And that is in the life of Jephthah. Jephthah is speaking to the Ammonites, and he says to them, he's about 1100 BC. He's one of the judges. Comes before the King Saul and King David and all that. He's about 1100 BC. And here's what he says. Do you not, he's talking to the Ammonites, do you not possess what Chemosh your God gives you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God has driven out before us, we will possess it. They were challenging, he lived in Gilead, so the part of Israel that was across on the eastern side of the Jordan, sort of in what is now northern part of Jordan, the nation today. Okay, so they're challenging his right to that land. He says, now are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab? Did he ever strive with Israel, or did he ever fight against them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years. Why did you not recover them within that time? So he's basically saying, like, we've been here for 300 years, and you're coming to complaining to us now? That's what he's saying now. So Jephthah, 1100 BC. So you add 300 years to 1100 BC, that gets you, plus 40 years in the wilderness, that gets you to 14. I should have 1440 there. Gets you to 1440 BC. All right. Do you have it in yours? Oh, I typed it wrong. I was just typing and not copying and pasting here. Okay, so I did. I made a mistake, and I made it correct. I corrected it as well at the same time. Anyhow, so 1440 BC. Now, of course, these are round numbers. Okay, and even 1446. We're not saying it's exactly. If you're saying the exact Exodus, when is it exactly? 1446 BC. That might be the answer you give on a college test in this subject, but it is not. It could give or take a couple years. Okay, could be 1500 or 1450. Could be 1440. Whatever. Somewhere in that range is when this happened, when the Exodus happened. Okay? Now, that is going to make, based on our understanding at the moment of Egyptian chronology, that makes Thutmose III the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but I just wonder if there's any comments or questions about what I said so far. Everybody good with that? I don't see any hands. The usual suspects aren't raising their hands, so okay, so let's go on to the liberal attacks. Okay, so liberalism doesn't want their, in fact, I was reading somewhere, I was on Wikipedia, and it was so reliable, and so they are saying that Exodus was probably written in the 500s BC, and it's like, so they're saying you can't rely on it at all. Like, why not? You know, it's just as good as the writings of at least, as the writings of the ancient historians, which they rely on. So that just shows a liberal bias. But anyway, liberal attacks, if they believe the Exodus happened at all, will put a date somewhere around 1266 BC. One of my commentaries said they must do a lot of gymnastics by interpreting the number in 1 Corinthians 6 or 1 Kings 6:1 symbolically. So that's Barrett's comment on that. Most of them will identify Ramses the first. So Ramses is the one that they name as the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11, and by the way, you probably want to be open to Exodus chapter 1 because we will be reading there eventually. But in verse 11 it says that when they enslaved the Israelites, it says they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. And so they say, oh, see, Ramses, so this is probably named after the Pharaoh. We don't have any evidence historically for the reason for giving this particular name to this particular city. Ramses is a common name in Egypt. It is rooted in Ra, one of the Egyptian gods, and likely those cities that are named in Exodus 1:11 are supply depots for Thutmose in his many raids into Palestine. All right, so let's see. That's what I had there. And then they also will argue from the lack of archaeological evidence for the conquest, beginning around 1406 BC, or the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings. So a couple of things on that. First of all, that's an argument from silence. They're saying, well, we don't have any evidence of anybody invading Canaan in 1406 BC, which would be the end of the wilderness wanderings. So therefore, it never happened. Or we've gone through the desert area around Mount Sinai and around where the Israelites are supposedly wandered, and there's no archaeological evidence. All right, so a couple of answers to that. Number one, they are living in tents. Archaeology is usually digging up buildings. You might find an ornament that was lost in the desert when somebody was walking by, or some little thing that was, broken utensil or something. But that could be left there at any time. How would you know? How would you date it? How would you give any kind of, how would you expect there to be any kind of evidence of a group of people moving in temporary dwellings that would last for now 3,500 years? I mean, that's a little much, okay? And then as far as the conquering of the nation, it's interesting. There were some cities that were destroyed. So, for example, Jericho. But many of these, many bits of the conquest, you study the book of Joshua, they defeated the army on the field and they took over the cities. They didn't destroy the cities. So why would there be any evidence of destruction? It would just be new owners. And that's not going to be left. There's not going to be much evidence of that left behind. It's very difficult to make that kind of an assertion. So those are responses, and really an argument from silence isn't a good argument. Anyway, that's our bit on the date. Any comments? Any further comments on that or questions, Gordon? Ramses is around 1266. 1266, yeah. Okay, Wolf, I know who you are. You're sitting in the wrong spot, that's why. The what now? Oh, well, some of those reports are dubious. Well, no, they really are. They really are. They're not trustworthy at all. The guy who promoted that was a fraud. Okay, so you have to just sort of throw that all up. No, they haven't. Really, it's not. It's totally bogus. Yes, yeah. So, yeah, we don't want to depend on that. All right, I think Rob and then Tola.
I was just going to say that the cartwheels at the time of the Egyptians were
Yeah. You will see people. They're well-meaning. I don't want to. They're well-meaning. They want to prove the Bible's true, and there have been claims made about, evidence for the crossing on the Red Sea and so forth. It's just not there. And they'll do all kinds of things. They'll talk about a different location for Mount Sinai, supposedly in a different place in Saudi Arabia. It's totally bogus. It's not true. All right, so Tola. Yes. Yes.
In Jesus Christ's day, that we're looking for signs.
Yes.
And Jesus said no sign will be given unto you.
Yeah.
And the Bible also made us to understand that a natural man does not understand the thing of the Spirit.
That's right.
They are foolishness unto him.
That's right. So Tola is reminding us that the natural man, the things of the Spirit are foolishness to him, and what they're looking for are signs, but they just need to trust the Word of God. Now the thing is, as I say, the archaeology itself is not an exact science. It is, what they do is they dig up an artifact. They date it in relation to other artifacts in the same layer of material in which they find it. They also have a certain amount of expertise in the kind of, say they're digging up a pot. They know the shape of the pot, who was likely to make a pot in that fashion. Who was likely to decorate it that way? What time period? Even as you go through periods of time, the decorations are going to be altered as to what is put on a pot, or whatever it is that's found. And I subscribe to I always get messed up, Biblical Archaeology Review, which is a liberal magazine. But you'll have one archaeologist say, okay, we've dug up this site, and here's all the characteristics, and here's all the things we found, and that means this site is X, the house of Caiaphas, or it's the house of, or it's this fort, or it's this city, or whatever. So then the next issue of the magazine, you often get a competing archaeologist that says, no, whatever he said or she said is bunk. It's this way. All of these things mean this, and blah, blah, blah. So there is not, archaeology is not like chemistry. You know, you do a reaction in chemistry, it produces a result. Archaeology, you dig up stuff and then you think about it. And you try to figure out what it means. It's not exact, so we have to be really careful on things that are said there. Okay, Marilyn.
Do we have an estimate of how many people came out of Egypt, the Jews?
Okay, so when we have an estimate of how many people came out of Egypt, in numbers we have a numbering of the tribes, of the warriors. Okay, I don't remember the number offhand, but it seems to me it was somewhere around 800,000 men between the ages of what, 20 and 50, was it, Rob, or something? Something like that. Men who are capable of bearing arms, anyway. So then from that we extrapolate and we say, well, okay, if there were all these men, they most likely, most of them were married, and so that you double. And then most likely they had kids. So you sort of figure out, okay, probably, I think the numbers I've heard is somewhere around 2 million people came out of the Exodus.
So what I'm thinking is, if they're tramping around the wilderness for 40 years, would that leave some indelible imprint on the land?
Not really. It's the desert, it's sand, and it's 3,000 years ago. I mean, it's just not going to leave anything. And so I wouldn't expect there to be evidence of that because it's so long ago. Like, how would you tell? One of the things, like even if you did find some footprints somewhere, how would you tell when they were laid down? There's nothing around it to tell you what time people walked there, right?
Did they build wells here and there?
Yeah, but even there, you got to have some way to tell when that was built and compare it to, you know, like if there's no material there that dates it, it's just no way to know.
No discarded manna.
Yeah, no discarded manna. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, the manna would rot after the next day, so that's not going to work. So it's just really, so we don't have, so you know, when people say, oh, there's not archaeological evidence, well, that doesn't matter. We wouldn't expect there to be. Okay, so what are we dealing with then? And the other thing here, I think the first point on this liberal attacks must do a bit of gymnastics by interpreting the number in 1 Kings 6:1 symbolically. That's very important. If you're going to read the Bible, let the Bible speak for what it says, and okay, so we know what year, roughly, the temple was built. Okay, add 480 to that. There you go, 1446. It's simple. You don't have to do some kind of fancy, oh, well, the Hebrew numbers meant this and that and the other thing, and try to come up with a fanciful interpretation. That seems... Like even if let's say that number, whatever it says in that verse, 480 years, let's say it's just an approximation, or let's say it's you know, a round number rather than an exact number. Well, it has a meaning. When whoever wrote down 1 Kings, he meant to write down what he wrote. We believe he wrote it under inspiration. The scriptures say, 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable. Okay, so that means God breathed it out. That's the word, inspiration. God breathed it out. So if God said it, okay, what we're saying is God spoke through those men. So if God spoke through those men, God doesn't make mistakes. That's our theory of inspiration. So we say, okay, that number, okay, it might be a round number, but it's the number. So we come up with a date, roughly 1446 for the Exodus, which gives us the date for Moses. All right, any further comments on that? Okay, let's move on, because it's the date. Ultimately, God doesn't really care if we have a date. He didn't give us a date, right? In the sense, we figured it out from First Kings, but does it really matter which date it is? God didn't record it, and interestingly, He didn't record the Pharaoh's name either. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so the other thing, the history of Israel and Egypt. So first of all, they lived in Egypt for 430 years. Exodus 12:40 tells us that. In fact, it says, Exodus 12:40 says, they left Egypt 430 years to the very day that Jacob entered Egypt. Okay? So that's quite interesting. That's quite a statement. I don't know how they were keeping track, but that's what it says. Okay? And so then, in Exodus 1:8, let's just stop there. On that point, I added some extra stuff here. Exodus in 1446 plus 430 means 1876 BC, Jacob in Egypt. Joseph lived 70 years after Jacob came to Egypt, so that's 1806 BC. Okay. Now we're basing that off the 1446 number. Again, those final numbers are just estimates. Could be a year or two off. Okay, but so basically 1806 BC is when Joseph died. All right. That brings us to chapter 1, verse 8. A new king arose who did not know Joseph. All right, so I'll just read that verse. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. So then he came to the decision to enslave them. Now, the question is, who was this king, this new king? We want to know. The Bible doesn't tell us, but we do want to know. All right, some extra history here. In our notes, I've said, God said to Abraham in Genesis 15:13 that his descendants would live in Egypt and be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. That's what the text says. The word oppressed in Genesis 15:13 can mean to be dependent on. And certainly Israel was dependent on Egypt through the whole sojourn. They depended on Egypt to allow them to live in the land, to allow them to live in Goshen, even during the time of Joseph. So we don't want to say, because if you go back, if you say that they were oppressed for 400 years, that goes back right into the time of Joseph, so that doesn't make sense. I guess that's what I'm trying to say with that point. Joseph lived in Egypt 70 years. All right, so then the next thing that we note is the Hyksos people. How many of you have ever heard of the Hyksos people? Rob has? Anybody else ever heard of the Hyksos people? Okay, so the Hyksos were Semitic people, which means what? Does anybody know what Semitic means?
Jewish.
Not Jewish. No, that's not correct. Rob.
Descendants of Shem.
Descendants of Shem. Okay, so the Israelites were descendants of Shem. And so we now call prejudice against the Jews as anti-Semitism. But it's really not Semites that they're against, it's Jews they're against. Okay? Semites include a lot of different people. Okay, so the Hyksos people were Semites. They were descendants of Shem. And if you look in the list of nations there in Genesis 11, you'll see there's more than just Abraham who are descendants of Shem. So that's what we're saying. They're in the same family tree, but they're a different branch. Okay, they're not the Jews. Now they came into Egypt, and they by 1650 BC to 1550 BC, they ruled what's called Lower Egypt. Now I probably should have put a map up. Okay, so if you think about Egypt, in your mind, there's where Egypt is on the upper right-hand corner of Africa. So when we say Lower Egypt, where would you think that would be in your thinking? Down in the south, right? Because for us, north is always up. For the Egyptians, the head of the Nile was up, the foot of the Nile was down. So Lower Egypt is the part down at the mouth of the Nile, by the Mediterranean. Okay? So you just have to, it's just the way they do it. So Lower Egypt. So the Hyksos basically ruled. Their capital was somewhere around this city, Ramses, that we mentioned here. And so they were ruling the Egyptians. Now, how do you think the Egyptians liked that? Anybody think the Egyptians were keen on this other group of people ruling them? Probably not. So eventually they threw them off. And we'll talk about that Pharaoh in just a moment, but there is a theory, Dr. Barrett in his book has a theory that, let's see, I guess I'll put his name in here, Ahmose I. Ahmose I was the Pharaoh from 1550 to 1504 BC. He's the one who expelled the Hyksos. And so he's an Egyptian. He is the end of the 17th dynasty in Egypt. So there we're ruling in Upper Egypt. They're competing with the Hyksos. And so he kicked them out and created what is called the New Kingdom period in Egypt. And so the Hyksos are gone, and he is the one who is suspicious of Semites in general. So some think that this enslavement began with Ahmose I. He resented Semites in general. He feared the aggression of Semitic Israelites, and so some suppose that Joseph served under a Hyksos pharaoh, but the numbers just don't add up. That's another comment to put in there. Ahmose was definitely the pharaoh when Moses was born, if the dates for the pharaohs are correct. We need to note that. However, it could mean that the pharaoh who did not know Joseph was a Hyksos pharaoh. Because one of the points that Dr. Barrett made in his book is that it is unlikely that a native Egyptian would be unaware of Joseph, first of all. It says this pharaoh did not know Joseph. Secondly, it is unlikely that the Israelites outnumbered the Egyptians. Okay? So rather, but they might outnumber the Hyksos. And the Hyksos might look at them as potential competitors for power, and therefore enslaved the Egypts, or the Israelites rather. And so after the Hyksos were kicked out, the Egyptians might continue that enslavement because of their general suspicion of Semitic people. So either way, somewhere in there's somebody who didn't like the Israelites. Any comments on that before we move on? Yes, Rob?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that or read that. But it also fits, if that's true, it also fits with the mouth of the Nile area was where the Hebrews were camped out. That was
right.
The area. So
that's where Goshen was, yes.
Yeah, so that fits with the same area.
That's right.
You said that, I
yeah.
heard it, so.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so let's move on to Marilyn, you want to say something?
The Jewish people are known for being clever, very clever and innovative. When would that have started to show?
Oh, I think they've always been clever, but I think most races are, really, so, yeah, or races. I use that term. I don't really mean that. There's only one race, the human race, right? Okay, so it doesn't matter doesn't matter where you're from, but there's clever people that come from all walks or all parts of the family tree of the human race.
But in general, they're known for it,
Well, yeah, but it's sort of a caricature. I think there's some dumb Israelites too, so. Okay, just like us.
They've got a lot of Nobel Prizes in science and stuff.
Yes.
God's blessing.
It depends on what their interests are, the things what they pursue. By the way, and so, for example, I'll give you another example. Like we often talk about how the Chinese people are so keen on science and things like this, and apparently at like places like Yale and that, almost a third of the student body are Chinese or some kind of ethnic grouping like that. Well, why is that? Because their families and their culture stress education so much. You just ask any of our folks here that are from those cultures, and it's like you go to school all day and then you go to school at night. I mean, you just talk to them, you ask them what it's like. That's why some of them are here, because they had enough of that. We don't want any more of that, right? Okay, so So, we're more like, oh yeah, okay, school, yeah, it's okay. Do well, get a good grade and don't cause any trouble. That's basically the way we look at school for kids. All right, so this is, I have here this chart that is I copied this from Dr. Barrett's book, okay? Now, this gives the dates for these different pharaohs, and it also, so the death of Moses is 1406, that's the date of the conquest, the beginning of the conquest. The date of the Exodus, this is what we're basing it on, is 1446. So that means when Moses, 40 years before, was kicked out of, or ran from Egypt, is 1486, okay? And so therefore, the birth of Moses has to be 1526 BC. All right, so those numbers, in the third column, those are derived from the Bible and from our reasoning from the Bible. They're not absolute hard and fast numbers, but within that range. All right, so now we see all these pharaohs and the dates that are given for them. So I did a little bit of checking. Now, not thorough. I can't go through every one of these, but these are the dates that are sort of generally accepted at this point in time. Now, one of my textbooks, which I also rely on, gives a different set of dates, and you'll notice if you look at about the fifth name down, it's Hatshepsut. She was Pharaoh 1479 to 1457, coincidentally with Thutmose III. Okay, so and he lasted longer than her. Now, I would dearly love, and this other textbook says Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh who rescued Moses. That's based on a different understanding of those dates. Okay, but this I think is the most up-to-date understanding of the dates for the pharaohs. If those dates are correct, then Hatshepsut can't be that daughter of Pharaoh, no matter how much I would love it to be her, just for the romance of it, right? Okay, but the dates don't fit. Obviously, like Moses is born before she's alive. According to these dates, it just doesn't fit for Moses, for Hatshepsut to be the daughter of Pharaoh who rescued Moses. Okay, so that I give you this chart for that reason. One of the things about Egyptian history is they are obsessed with the names of their pharaohs whom they worshipped as gods after they passed. The Bible only names pharaohs when Egypt was a lesser power, not the great power of Moses' day. So that's kind of interesting, that observation. You go through, all the way through, the only time you start hearing pharaohs' names is way into the period of the kings, when the pharaohs are not as powerful. God saying, who are you? You're nothing. Okay? Now, God said to the Pharaoh of the Exodus, but indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, in order to proclaim my name throughout all the earth. So if Moses the third is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, he was a very powerful Pharaoh. He apparently led 19 expeditions into Palestine. So military expeditions. This was during basically, his reign, and even during the time of the wilderness wanderings. Okay, so he had a lot of power, but if that's so, the Bible doesn't even condescend to give us his name. Now, for us who like these details, it would be kind of nice if we knew who he was. The Bible doesn't tell us. It's obviously not important. But if we're lining up these dates based on our best understanding of the historical dates for these pharaohs at this time, this is where he fits in. Yes, Rob?
Three quick things. One, John points out to me you've got a typo in the second one down. Amenhotep the first. Looks like 2504, the reign of 1,000 years.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. That was close.
Good catch, John.
Yeah.
And second thing is, I read a lot of creation science stuff. And,
Yeah.
one of their arguments against, they all say, as you said, it's not Ramses, the
Right.
Exodus. Like they all say,
Yes.
What they also point out, one article I read points out that it didn't help that the Ten Commandments movie had Yul Brynner as Ramses.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
sort of popularized the idea.
Yes, of course, they're basing that on a liberal view, yes.
Yeah, made it sort of romantic too,
Yeah.
and stuff. The third thing I'll say is, you said, you can't say this for sure, of course. Some of the creation science stuff I'm reading by reputable guys is saying it's the next one down that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Yes, that's the one that traditionally, in my other textbook, this is what it said. However, I think it's an old textbook. No, Barrett's book came out last year.
Oh, yeah, this is recent too, so
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Okay, so what I'm saying though is, what he's giving is what is now the current dates for the pharaohs. There's in terms of how they think it is. Now, how do they base the dates of the pharaohs? Well, it's kind of sketchy.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's historical documents listing all the pharaohs and saying he reigned this many years and and they have different ways of figuring it out. But the fact is, it is not, again, it's not an absolute science. Nobody in the history is saying, I want to make sure I get these dates just right, the ancient historians. That's not what they were interested in. They're telling you the story. And usually, if it's an Egyptian source, they want to aggrandize their kings, right? These are our great kings, this is when they lived, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we have to recognize that all of this is taken with a grain of salt. In the end, it does not matter who was the Pharaoh of Egypt. The Bible doesn't name him. Okay, so it does not matter. But still, we want to know. And so I'm just giving you the chart. This is based on, I think, the latest current understanding. But that could change because archaeology is always changing stuff.
So our dates are, we have a point in history.
Yes.
The birth of Christ.
Yeah. Which isn't zero.
Which isn't zero, right. But, so they didn't have a point. So like they didn't have year so-and-so.
Well, they would have years, but so people have to, when you start talking about ancient dates, they'll say their calculation of what years it is. Okay? And it may not be, so if you got a king list from Egypt, it may say, Amos the one reigned for so many years.
Yeah.
And then his son Amenhotep the first came in, and he reigned for so many years. All right, and so as you go this long list, that's the way the list is going to be like. It's be like our lists in so and so was the father, and so he lived so many. Okay, it'll be like that. Okay, so then you have to collate that with other material to get a date when you can say this is when this guy lived. And then you can start doing the math and figuring out the dates for the rest of
So
them.
they didn't have, like we say, this is 2000.
Right.
They didn't have a date.
Most of the time they didn't. Okay, the Romans would have dates, the year of the city. Okay, and they would say so many years since the city was founded. Again, okay, but it's all their concerns historically were not the same as ours. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And what I also am trying to say is here, we're laying Moses out beside the current understanding, general understanding of the dates of the pharaohs. And then finally, my final point is, it doesn't really matter who the pharaoh is. Because the Bible doesn't say. So obviously it doesn't matter. Okay? All right. All right, so I put in the last point there on those section. God was interested in recording the history of Moses and Israel and making his own name great. Okay, so let's go to the birth of Moses. We don't have a lot of time, but we're really just going to be reading the scriptures here. This story is fairly well known to us. So this is leading up to 1526 BC. That's when Exodus 1 is the birth of Moses. 1526 BC is roughly the date for him. So the first thing is the peril of the enslavement, verses 8 to 14. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war they will join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land." So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. They built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. All right, how far do I want to go here? Verse 14. And The Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. So this is the condition of Israel prior to the birth of Moses. They're enslaved. They're being put onto this kind of rigor. And then the next bit we have is the Pharaoh of the genocide. Now, verse 15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, when you were helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? The midwives said to the Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them. Now just a little pause here. Notice it says they're referring to the midwife as if it's not them but other midwives. So we know that Shiphrah and Puah are sort of the chief midwives of Israel, and there were others as well. So it's a large nation. Marilyn asked that question of how many people there were. You think about just 2 women handling the births for 2 million people? That seems a little much. So there were probably a lot more. Okay, but they were the midwives in charge, if we want to put it that way. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So that's the story of the Pharaoh of the genocide. Now, these pharaohs are not necessarily the same individual. Okay, it could be that we're covering a wide expanse of time. Now, the way it's written, it sounds like the same individual, but it could expand over quite a few years. So the killing of the infants was a strategy that they brought in at a later time, right around the time of the birth of Moses. Okay. Any questions on that? Yes, Addie.
Yeah, I think I'm struggling with your earlier thoughts about the archaeological records and the fact that Pharaoh's daughter
Yes.
existed way after Moses' records.
Well, that one daughter, yes. There were many others, of course.
Okay, so that's just a perspective.
Yes,
Right? Because
yeah.
I'm now wondering, now this is the biblical record, and it's a well-known story.
Yes.
How do we piece this two together? Oh, we just look at the wonder and then look
Right.
at the other perspectives.
Right. Well, the thing is that Hatshepsut, if you know anything about Egyptian history, she is remarkable because she was a female pharaoh. And she reigned as pharaoh. And there are statues of her with a beard. Okay. Which is funny. But she apparently, she would wear a beard in court occasions, a fake beard, because she's the pharaoh, right? And it's like, this is so weird. Anyhow, they couldn't handle a woman being in charge. So now, because she's so famous, it's very romantic to think of her as the Pharaoh's daughter who found Moses. The problem is, the numbers don't add up. Okay, so it was most probably, a different Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, all right, so now let's read about her. The birth of Moses, verses 1 through 10, chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. I always have to wonder if Moses was ugly, what would have happened? Anyway, but what baby does a mother think is ugly? I don't know. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." And so the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and then he became her son. And she named him Moshe, or Moses, and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." All right. So, based on our understanding of the dates, the Pharaoh of Moses' birth was Ahmose the first, 1550 to 1504. The Pharaoh who expelled the Hyksos. Now, the biblical record gives prominence in this story to the providence of God. Now, what does providence mean? That means God not acting directly, but indirectly. So God is behind the scenes. Like Moses' mother, we later learn her name, Jochebed, put Moses into the water and trusting God. She didn't just cast him in the water, but she made a little boat for him to sail in to hide him out on the water during the day. And it happened that it was a place where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. This may have been a ritualistic bathing or whatever. But then it happened that Pharaoh's daughter looked and had pity on the little child. Okay? Now, and there's a lot of reasons that could be, but she did. And so then here's Miriam, his older sister, standing by. "Would you like me to get a nurse for the baby?" Like the Pharaoh's daughter is not a dummy. I'm sure she knows this is probably the sister of the little boy. And the woman she's going to call is probably the mother. I mean, I don't think people can probably figure that out pretty quick. Okay? So then now she has license from Pharaoh's daughter to have that child. And she doesn't have to hide him anymore. Right? And it's a beautiful story. Now this is God working behind the scenes. That's providence. When God meets Moses at the burning bush, that's God directly acting. There is a difference, so we need to keep that in mind. And this is one of the things that we have. In fact, I think I saw a comment, and I will come up to this again. When God speaks to Moses at the burning bush, as far as the biblical record is found, it is the first time that God has directly spoken to somebody since somewhere in the life of Jacob, over 400 years. They don't have a Bible. They have the traditions of their fathers, and they're still the people of God, following God. It's a really remarkable story. Anyway, we are out of time, and it's time for lunch. So let's have a word of prayer, and we'll close. Our Father, we thank you for this time, for this remarkable story that we have of the birth of Moses, and we thank you for what Moses did in establishing Israel. We pray for your blessing now in our understanding, and as we go forth, that we would be faithful to you in everything. In Jesus' name, amen.